Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard 0924 coming at you with another video for you guys today. Gonna take this opportunity to do a review on Royal Rumble 1993. Now this is gonna be the first video of the new year, so just want to wish you guys all a happy new year of 2017. Now that Royal Rumble is coming around the corner, I just figured I'd take this opportunity to review some of the older events that have happened throughout the past couple decades that the Royal Rumble has been around. And this particular year is going to be from a period that I was very young at the time, that I just had very vague memories. This was actually a pay per view that I've never watched up until this point. So I just thought that would be kind of interesting to see what it was like, especially with the Royal Rumble and all the contestants that were participating in the Royal Rumble, not just the match itself, but also the pay per view. And I've already watched a lot of the stuff that I've seen from the Attitude Era, and even remember ordering some of the Royal Rumble pay-per-views from the Ruthless Aggression era. So I want to really try and backtrack some of the older Royal Rumble events, especially some of the earlier ones that were around before the Attitude Era. So 1993 was one of the pay-per-views from the, I guess you could say either, it was really towards the precursor. It was sort of a little before the new generation, although it wasn't officially the new generation era just yet. You still had some of the established talent from the rock and wrestling connection with guys like Hulk Hogan. You still had guys like Macho Man, who was, I believe, was already doing commentary by this point, but he was still around and even wrestled here and there, time to time. Let's see, Ted DiBiase was around for a little bit. By this point, he was teaming with IRS, with Money Incorporated. You also had the Big Boss Man, who was still around for a little bit as well, but this would be kind of the tail end of that particular period of wrestling, especially any remnants of wrestlers that came from the glory periods of the MTV rock and wrestling generation of the 1980s wrestling boom. So that was slowly starting to phase out. Hulk Hogan, I believe, was doing movies, if I'm not mistaken. You also have to factor in the steroid scandal, which there was a bunch of wrestlers that were being held off WWF television during this time. Guys like the British Bulldog, for instance. It was a massive upheaval for WWE during this time. Now, I'm just kind of digressing a little bit because I'm just mentioning about all the stuff that's been going on going into this pay per view and just what the climate was during that time period. But Royal Rumble 1993 was a pay per view that I actually really enjoyed. I know there's some people out there that weren't very fond of this pay per view, but just watching it for the first time, I thought it was very interesting just to see what who was on the roster during this time. Now, I'll get more into the Royal Rumble match as it goes along. This was actually the first pay per view event, especially the first Royal Rumble, especially where the winner of that match would go on to headline WrestleMania and to go on to face whoever the world champion was going into that event. Just want to kind of go into detail regarding the undercard. And the pay per view that opened up this show was a tag team match between the Steiner brothers and the Beverly brothers. Yeah, this was actually a pretty solid match. It was about 10 minutes or so. Beverly Brothers got most of the offense, but Steiner Brothers ended up coming back. I think Scott Steiner, who was the legal man, ended up getting the victory with the Frankensteiner. So him and Rick Steiner ended up going over. So I thought that was actually a pretty solid match because they were only around for just a short period of time. They even held the tag title belts at one point, and they were pretty much gone by WrestleMania 10. And I believe they went back to Japan for a bit, and then they went back to WCW. And Scott Steiner ended up turning on Rick to become Big Papa Pump and really establishing himself as a potential main eventer in WCW. And then Scott Steiner ended up going back to WWE anyway. So, but this match was. I was actually I had a really had a much of a blast actually watching this match. So I'm not going to spoil too much, but just some pretty fun stuff. Then we have is the Intercontinental Championship bout between the champion Shawn Michaels defending the belt against Marty Jannetty. So this build up basically stems from the infamous barbershop segment. Now, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, they were both partners at one point. They were a tag team known as the Rockers. And there was a bit of a rift that was going on towards the tail end of 1991. And basically, they were participating in a Survivor Series match where Marty Jannetty accidentally had sort of a miscommunication with Shawn Michaels that caused both of them to get eliminated in their respective Survivor Series match. So there was just a bunch of bickering that has been going on, and even in the weeks leading into 1992. Now, the barbershop segment was done by Brutus Beefcake. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were trying to make amends. And just when it looks like they were back on good terms, Shawn Michaels out of nowhere hits Marty Jannetty with a super kick, and basically the infamous moment where Shawn Michaels just threw Marty Jannetty through the glass window. And interesting enough, they were supposed to continue on to that program going into WrestleMania 8, but a series of unfortunate events caused the match not to take place. Marty Jannetty ended up getting fired. I believe when I was reading up the information as to why the match didn't take place, Marty Jannetty ended up assaulting a police officer, and because of all those unfortunate events that happened behind the scenes, Marty Jannetty, I believe, ended up getting fired, or at least was taken off TV throughout most of 1992. So eventually, Marty Jannetty ended up getting back to the WWE. He ends up returning to get some revenge on Shawn Michaels after what he did to him just about a year ago. And this kind of builds up to Royal Rumble 1993, their match scheduled for that pay per view. Sensational Sherry Martel, who was also in this involved in this match. Now Sherry was a valet for Shawn Michaels not long after he parted ways with Marty Jannetty. So eventually there was some miscommunication that was going on between him and Sherry. Sherry ends up coming out to the match anyways, and basically sides along with Marty Jannetty. This was actually a really fun match. Some really cool back and forth, a lot of near falls along the way, a few rest holds as well. There was a moment where, if I can recall correctly, at some point Marty Jannetty had the match won, and something happened along. There was like a bit of a ref bump that went along during the middle of the match. Shawn and Sherry had a bit of a confrontation. Shawn Michaels just kept yelling after Sherry, and Sherry's just like, "Please, please, Shawn, don't hurt me. I'm sorry," and all this sort of stuff that's been going on, and even Sherry wanting to make amends with Shawn Michaels and trying to reconcile with him and such. So eventually, Shawn Michaels ended up nailing Marty Jannetty with the Sweet Chin Music, and basically walked out of the match still your Intercontinental Champion. So yeah, I definitely thought this was the highlight of this particular pay per view, especially between these two wrestlers. And yeah, I think Marty Jannetty ended up leaving after this. Actually, he came back. It was just very complicated because like Marty Jannetty was gone, and then he came back, and then he was gone by WrestleMania 9 before they could really continue on this storyline. But Maury Jannetty did in fact came back in '93, and they had like sort of a rematch that went on. I believe this was might have been around the time when Diesel might have debuted, and ended up becoming Shawn Michaels' bodyguard. So yeah, I definitely really enjoyed this match, and it doesn't really get talked a whole lot as far as the match itself is concerned. Because when people think of Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, they think of the infamous barbershop segment, but no one ever really talks about how star-studded of a match that it is. I don't think it really gets enough credit for that. So I definitely really enjoyed the Intercontinental title bout. So for those that have probably not seen that match, I highly recommend you check it out. I mean, I think you'll have a blast watching it. So after the first two matches, we do get a bit of a sort of a buffer match. Sort of, it was kind of a step down from the Intercontinental title match, but this consisted of Bam Bam Bigelow taking on the Big Boss Man. Now, Bam Bam Bigelow had, I believe, had already debuted. Um, I'm trying to look at the dates, but let me check and see because I think he was already in the WWE in the late '80s, but he never really didn't really hit it big during that time. And he made his pay per view. Yeah, it was actually his pay per view return, not his debut. But he ended up having a bit of a program with the Big Boss Man, and really proved victorious. So Bam Bam Bigelow was pretty much dominant throughout most of the match, even working on the abdomen or the waist lock of the Big Boss Man, and then basically won with the diving headbutt. I don't think the match was kind of a letdown, and it didn't really need to go as long as it did. It went along about 10 minutes. If it had gone at least a little shorter than that, like maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes, then maybe it wouldn't have been as much of a bore fest, if that's even a word. But I don't mind Bam Bam Bigelow and Big Boss Man. They did what they could. It's very unfortunate that those two wrestlers are no longer with us. So Bam Bam Bigelow ended up going over the Big Boss Man. No, as far as his WWE run was concerned, I don't think he ever won any title belts. At least even from research, I don't think he ever did hold a title belt, especially during the couple years that he was on WWE. But he would go on to have his success. He had a match. He even headlined WrestleMania against Lawrence Taylor at WrestleMania 11. So that was probably the biggest thing to come out of his wrestling career. He would go on to have his success in ECW as the television champion, representing the triple threat with Shane Douglas. Bam Bam Bigelow's definitely had a really great career especially as the years went on. Then we get to the fifth match, which involves the WWF Championship bout between Bret Hart taking on Razor Ramon. Now, Bret Hart, this would be his first world title reign, and he ended up defeating Ric Flair at a house show back in October of '92. So Bret Hart has been holding that belt ever since. He even challenged Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series. So then he goes on to feud with Razor Ramon. So Razor Ramon had been an accomplice for Ric Flair during this time. Now they basically opened up this match with Razor Ramon just getting the early advantage and just attacking Bret Hart through the legs, doing all he can to wear down Bret Hart. Bret Hart makes a comeback. He attacks Razor Ramon, even locks in the figure four leg lock. There was actually a pretty cool suicide dive spot that Bret did to Razor Ramon towards the end of the match. Razor Ramon tried to do the Razor's Edge, but Bret Hart counters into a roll up. And then Bret Hart tried to go for a sharpshooter. Razor Ramon manages to grab the ropes. Bret Hart just refuses to break the hold. Bret Hart is just continuing to wear down his opponent. Bret Hart ends up making Razor Ramon submit with the sharpshooter to retain the WWF title. And this was actually a really good match. Definitely a hidden gem. But then we get to a segment in between that World title match and the Royal Rumble match itself, we also get a segment from Bobby Heenan, who ends up debuting or introducing the Lex Luger, who you may know him as the Total Package from WCW. So the narcissist Lex Luger was sort of a key emphasis on his character in terms of his emphasis on his physique and his overall appearance. Lex Luger was part of the World Bodybuilding Federation. It was basically a spin-off of the bodybuilding. Well, basically Vince McMahon created a bodybuilding organization in the early 90s that was there to compete with International Federation of Bodybuilders. And this would be kind of Vince McMahon's attempt to compete with that particular organization and create his own spin on it. Sort of like what Vince McMahon ended up doing with the XFL. Lex Luger had previously worked with Vince McMahon, even in the early 90s, and especially in 1992. And it wouldn't be until the new year in 1993 when Lex Luger would make his televised appearance in the WWE. And Bobby Heenan, having been a manager and even a commentator for a couple years up until this point, so he ends up introducing Lex Luger to the audience. It wouldn't be long. Lex Luger didn't last long under this gimmick. He would end up going into the All American Express, Lex Express, especially around the time of summer '93. Hulk Hogan ended up leaving the WWE to focus on his acting, and wouldn't be long enough before he jump shipped over to WCW. So WWE figured, why not have another hero to look up to with All American Lex Luger? Because since Hulk Hogan was a real American, looks like we need to have another reincarnation of a real American in Lex Luger. And that's what they ended up doing with Luger and repackaging him from being the narcissist to the all-American hero. Once WWE realized that fans preferred to see Bret Hart as the top guy in the company as opposed to someone that they were intending on pushing with a guy like Lex Luger. So Lex Luger's run in WWE was kind of left more to be desired. It was just a case of unfortunate events, and especially since Luger, they didn't really want to see another similar built babyface hero in Hulk Hogan. That was pretty much the death of the nail in the coffin for Lex Luger once his title run, or once his road to the top just kind of backfired, especially SummerSlam 93 and Luger winning against Yokozuna but not winning the title because he couldn't do the count out. Even had the rematch with Yokozuna at WrestleMania 10, and that kind of backfired as well. But yeah, so Lex Luger's run in the WWE is kind of forgettable, really, or just kind of, I don't know, just not up to par with the stuff that he did in WCW. And now we get to the Royal Rumble match. Now, as I said earlier in the video, this would be the first Royal Rumble match from that point onward that the winner of that particular 30-man Rumble will go on to WrestleMania to have a number one contendership bout against whoever the world champion was going into that event. So the Royal Rumble match, the crowd really helped this match. I think if it wasn't for the crowd, I think I would have been bored to tears. But I actually enjoyed this. I know some people had problems with it as well. Maybe just the lack of star power compared to the previous year's Rumble. Or just the fact that there was just way too many wrestlers in the undercard. Especially, you had a lot of tag team wrestlers that were involved in the Royal Rumble match. Like a majority of the contestants were already in a tag team, like, Ted DiBiase, one of the popular, notable, key, important villains from the 80s boom period. But by this point, he had been a tag team specialist like Earthquake and Typhoon, who were a tag team at one point. And this would actually be the last appearance of Earthquake in WWE because he was eliminated. I believe he was eliminated by Typhoon, and then they never really had sort of a feud, or at least that they looked like they were going to tease it, especially the moment that Earthquake got eliminated and just his reaction to what his partner did to him and why Typhoon eliminated him. So there was not really a lot of stuff that materialized because Earthquake was gone not long after this pay per view. Had the Undertaker, who wasn't at that point in his career where you could consider him a top elite wrestler, but even though he had already had a one world title reign from Hulk Hogan, but that was short lived. But yeah, Undertaker was still trying to come into his own, especially in the early '90s. He eliminated a couple guys here and there, but ends up getting eliminated by a debuting Giant Gonzalez, and that would set up their feud for WrestleMania 9. Like Rick Martel and Tito Santana rekindling their feud, and they even kind of went back and forth at each other. And yeah, they were part of a tag team called Strike Force, and they even I believe they held the tag title belts at least once. It feels like they had a tag title run, but I can't like this. They were before my time, so I'm trying my best to kind of do some research to see if they had a tag title run. But it feels like they did. But yeah, I mean they had a bit of a falling out in a match they had against Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. Yeah, they actually held the tag title belts at least once. It says they won the belts from the Hart Foundation, and then they lost the belts to Demolition at WrestleMania 4. They pretty much rekindled their rivalry, especially in this Royal Rumble match. So there was actually at least some storytelling going into this. Actually, the final four came down to Macho Man Randy Savage, Bob Backlund, Yokozuna, and Rick Martel. Bob Backlund eliminates Rick Martel, and then Yokozuna just ends up clobbering Bob Backlund, who had been the Iron Man throughout this entire Royal Rumble match. So the crowd just very disappointed when Bob Backlund got eliminated. It came down to Macho Man and Yokozuna. This was a lot back and forth, just plenty of suspense, making you believe that Macho Man may have a chance to dethrone Yokozuna over the top rope. But despite the number of axe handle attempts that Macho Man Randy Savage has done and just making numerous attempts to wear down Yokozuna, it just wasn't enough. Randy Savage tried to go for the diving elbow drop, which he succeeded, but then I guess the finish was just kind of a little whack because Macho Man should have known that there was no pinfalls in the Royal Rumble, but Macho Man went ahead and tried to go for a cover, but Yokozuna just popped up, and then Macho Man ended up getting eliminated to allow Yokozuna to become the winner of the 1993 Royal Rumble. So Yokozuna would go on to face Bret Hart at WrestleMania 9 in one of the most infamous endings of a WrestleMania match, for better or worse. And then like Hulk Hogan coming out there and just stealing the spotlight and trying to put himself in the match at the last moment, and end up stealing Yokozuna's spotlight and becoming world champion out of left field. um, yeah, so it felt kind of a waste for Yokozuna somewhat. I mean, he would end up winning the belt back again from Hogan at King of the Ring, being the first there to even have this clause to face the world champion at a WrestleMania. So it just kind of looked like it was going to backfire, and luckily Yokozuna ended up recovering from that humiliation. But yeah, this Royal Rumble, it was a sign of a that change was approaching, and you could really tell from the climate, especially with some of the wrestlers that were coming into the company, especially being their first appearance in a pay per view for WWE, like someone like Yokozuna was, I think this was one of his first pay per view appearances in WWE. Steiner Brothers was coming in. Bam and Bigelow made his re-debut. I think Razor Ramon also made his debut here as well. Some of the old guards were slowly phasing out, like Big Boss Man and the Nasty Boys, who were surprisingly in the company during this time, but even they were kind of petering out. Ric Flair, like I discussed, he was still in the Royal Rumble match, but he didn't last very long. He even left the company in that after losing that loser lead town match against Mr. Perfect. Macho Man had become a commentator for most of the remainder of his run in WWE. I think the reasons why people bash on this Royal Rumble is because there just wasn't enough star power compared to the previous year's Royal Rumble, and it just kind of maybe dragged on a little more, or a little longer than it did. I'd say I would definitely enjoy this over Royal Rumble 1995. I mean, there was 95 Rumble just kind of felt really lackluster with lack of talent or lack of star power, and it was basically two or three wrestlers who you could predict could win the Royal Rumble, and everyone else just kind of felt like an afterthought. It was mostly Shawn Michaels and British Bulldog dominating throughout a majority of the match, and even though it had a pretty cool ending, but it was very sad, especially with the talent that they had in the 95 Rumble compared to 93, because at least you could say 90 had some star power and storylines that have been rekindled from years past. So at least I'll give 93 Royal Rumble the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, because this was the first time I actually watched this Royal Rumble a few days ago, I definitely really enjoyed it. It's not the best Royal Rumble, but it might be an unpopular opinion to some, but I actually really like this Royal Rumble for some reason. So that's really my review for the 1993 Royal Rumble. Let me know what your thoughts are regarding this pay per view. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What were some of your favorite matches? Let me know down in the comment section below. And until then, this is the Gold Standard 0924 signing out.